But see, he thought he was walking into a lecture. He didn't know he'd be walking straight into a trap. It was the kind of campus that radiated prestige, towering columns, immaculate lawns, and a quiet confidence that only Ivy League institutions seemed to possess. Barron Trump had walked through his share of high-profile buildings, but today felt different. He wasn't here for a photo op, a meeting, or a name drop. He came as a student, anonymous, respectful, and quietly curious. The Future Leaders Symposium was an elite gathering. Students from across the nation were handpicked to attend, selected for their academic promise and leadership potential. Barron had earned his seat. He wanted to listen, learn, and maybe gain insight from minds he didn't always agree with. He entered the packed auditorium early. Rows of polished desks gleamed under the soft lights, and quiet chatter hummed from the student body. A professor's name flashed on the massive projection screen at the front. Dr. Landon Wolfe, a tenured sociologist known for his fiery rhetoric and unfiltered lectures on the dismantling of harmful traditions. Barron took a seat in the third row near the center. He placed his notebook on the desk and adjusted the small silver cross that hung from his neck. Barely visible beneath his shirt collar, but meaningful to him. He didn't wear it to make a statement. He wore it because it was part of him. He didn't know that by the time this lecture ended, that necklace would become the center of a firestorm, and that he would become the spark. What started as a lecture turned into a one-man inquisition, and Barron was the target. The doors slammed shut. A man stormed in with the force of a gavel crashing down on a courtroom bench. He wore a tailored blazer, rimless glasses, and an expression that dripped with disdain. Dr. Landon Wolfe. He didn't walk, he marched straight to the podium, eyes scanning the room like a general assessing his troops. "For those who don't know me yet," he barked, "I am not here to coddle you." A hush fell over the students. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Some exchanged nervous glances. "I want every phone turned off," Wolfe declared, his voice thunderous, "and placed on your desks, face down, now." A few students hesitated but quickly obeyed. "And one more thing," he added with a smirk. "Absolutely no cameras. I don't care who your daddy is or what your last name is. My classroom, my rules." A wave of unease moved through the crowd. No one dared object. Wolfe let the silence settle like a storm cloud. Then, without even beginning his PowerPoint, he launched into his favorite subject, the death of faith. "You know," he said, pacing like a performer on stage, "it's amusing how many people still believe in invisible sky beings. It's like watching adults suck their thumbs." A few students chuckled weakly. Most stayed silent. Barron's pen moved quietly over his notebook. He kept his gaze steady, his posture relaxed. But the professor noticed him. Wolfe's eyes zeroed in on the subtle gleam of metal around Barron's neck. He didn't say anything, not yet. But the smirk widened. Wolfe pulled up his presentation. The title exploded across the screen in stark white letters. "Faith is a disease. How religion hinders progress." The room held its breath. "This isn't a debate," Wolfe said. "This is a wake-up call. For too long, we've tolerated superstition disguised as tradition. It's time for a purge." His voice rose. His gestures became more theatrical. The lecture was no longer academic. It was a sermon of another kind, one that aimed to burn belief to the ground. And in the third row, Barron Trump continued to take notes, calm, unshaken, but he could feel the professor's stare, like a laser, fixed on the small cross resting just above his heart. One paper, one signature, one line between courage and compromise. Dr. Wolf clapped his hands once, sharply. "It's time," he announced, reaching into his leather briefcase, "to move from theory to action." He held up a stack of crisp white papers, each with a printed title in bold, "The Enlightenment Pledge." "Each of you," he said, his voice tightening, "will sign this document. Not tomorrow, not next week, now." He began walking between the rows, placing a copy on every desk like a king issuing decrees. "This pledge," he explained, "is a commitment to reject the falsehoods of ancient belief systems, to rise above the shackles of tradition, and to finally embrace a world governed by reasons, not ritual." Murmurs rippled through the room. Barron glanced down at the paper now sitting in front of him. The language was blunt, brutal. It called faith a delusion, described religious traditions as cultural viruses, condemned all belief in divine creation as mental regression. It didn't ask for open discussion. It demanded surrender. Wolf stopped at Barron's desk, tapping the paper with 2 fingers. "Care to be our first volunteer, Mr. Trump?" he asked, loudly enough for the room to hear. The auditorium fell silent. Barron looked up at the professor. His expression didn't change. His hand didn't shake. "I'm afraid I'll have to decline, Professor," he said softly. The room tensed. Wolf's grin grew vicious. "Oh, why's that? Did your invisible friend whisper something in your ear?" he mocked. A few students chuckled nervously. Others looked uncomfortable. Barron didn't flinch. "No, sir," he replied, gently touching the cross at his neck. "I simply won't sign a document that mocks someone's deeply held beliefs, whether they're mine or anyone else's." The room was still. Wolf's eyes narrowed. His voice dropped an octave. "Let me be perfectly clear," he hissed. "In my classroom, superstition has no place. I don't care what name is on your birth certificate. If you want to be part of the future, you leave that Bronze Age baggage at the door." He pointed at the cross. "You can either sign the pledge or show this class what stubborn ignorance looks like." Barron's reply came not with defiance, but with unwavering calm. "I came here to learn, not to conform," he said. "And if this lecture is about replacing faith with fear, then maybe it's not the future I'm being asked to join. It's just a new kind of control." A pause, a breath, and then the faintest ripple of something new in the room. Not fear, respect. He tried to shame one student, but the fire he lit couldn't be put out. For a moment, Dr. Wolf stood frozen, lips curled in a sneer, expecting Barron to sit down and shrink beneath the weight of humiliation. But Barron didn't shrink. He straightened. "You speak of progress, Professor," Barron said calmly. "But progress built on mockery and coercion isn't progress. It's tyranny in disguise." A few heads turned. Students who had remained silent, uncertain, now began to glance around, wondering if they were witnessing the first spark of something larger. Dr. Wolf scoffed, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Spare me the melodrama. This isn't about you." "No," Barron agreed. "It never was. It's about all of us. Every student who has sat in silence because they were afraid to speak their truth." From the back of the hall, a slight movement. A tall figure in a dark suit quietly slipped in through the rear doors. He stood along the back wall, arms folded, face unreadable, unnoticed, watching. Dr. Wolf grabbed the pointer from his podium, jabbing at his slides. "This is science, not superstition. I'm teaching truth, not pandering to fairy tales." Barron didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The professor's outburst echoed through the hall with a bitterness that no longer sounded like conviction, more like fear. He thought he was in control. He didn't realize the walls were closing in. Dr. Wolf turned away from the crowd, adjusting his microphone, attempting to regain control. That's when Barron raised his hand, not defiantly, just deliberately, and pointed straight up. to the small, unblinking red light in the corner of the ceiling. "Professor," he said, "are you more concerned about being questioned or about being recorded?" Dr. Wolf followed the gesture slowly. His eyes locked on the ceiling-mounted camera. His expression flickered. "Who authorized that?" he snapped. "There were to be no recordings. I made that clear." From the shadows at the back, the suited figure stepped forward. "I did!" Gasps scattered across the room. Dr. Wolf squinted. "And who exactly are you?" "Dean McAllister," the man replied, stepping into the light. "Chair of the Office of Academic Integrity." The professor's confidence faltered. "This lecture," Dean McAllister continued, "was under review. We've received multiple reports of religious targeting in your classroom." "Targeting," Wolf sputtered. "I'm challenging ideas. That's what academia is for." "No, Professor," the dean replied coolly. "Academia is for inquiry, not for intimidation." Murmurs rippled again. The entire tone of the room shifted, no longer Wolf's court. Barron remained silent. He had done his part. Now the truth had taken over. One voice stood up, then another, then an entire movement. The dean looked around. If any student has something to say, now would be the time. It began with a single sound, the scraping of a chair. A young woman in the front row stood. Her voice trembled, but her eyes did not. "Last semester," she said, "Dr. Wolf gave me a failing grade because I quoted a theologian in my ethics paper. He said I had polluted the assignment with primitive doctrine." The room stiffened. Then another student rose. "He mocked me in front of the entire class when I shared that I pray before exams. Told me superstition won't raise my GPA." A third stood, then a fourth. Each voice added another brick to the growing wall of testimony. Some were tearful, others resolute. Barron watched as the silent majority found its voice. The fear that had kept them still was dissolving into something stronger. Solidarity. The professor backed toward the wall, his face pale, his authority shattered. Dean McAllister turned to him. "You said this wasn't about one student. You're right. It's about all of them." The students applauded. Not for the dean, for each other, and for the courage it took to say, "Enough." In that moment, the lecture hall was no longer a battlefield. It was a turning point, and Barron Trump had simply lit the match. He built his career on control. Now he was watching it crumble. Dr. Wolf was visibly sweating now. His jaw clenched as student after student stood to speak. Years of unchecked arrogance unraveled in real time. Dean McAllister stepped forward again. "Professor, we've reviewed recordings, syllabi, student evaluations, and emails. There's a pattern." Wolf attempted to straighten his blazer. "This is absurd. These are emotional overreactions. My job is to challenge minds." Another voice interrupted him. It came from the entrance. "No, Dr. Wolf. Your job was to educate, not indoctrinate." A second figure emerged. Dr. Helena Grant, Dean of Faculty Affairs from Wolf's own university. Her presence silenced the room. "We've been conducting an independent inquiry," she said firmly. "We received dozens of complaints over the last 2 years. What I've seen today confirms everything." Wolf's bravado cracked. "You're here to fire me? Over one student's stunt?" Barron, still seated, didn't even look up. Dr. Grant shook her head. "Not over one student. Over your pattern of abuse, your misuse of authority, and the fear you've instilled in those you were meant to mentor." She turned to Dean McAllister. "Effective immediately, Professor Wolf is relieved of all academic duties. Security will escort him off the premises." Wolf turned red. "This is cancel culture. You're silencing me because I don't believe in fairy tales." Dr. Grant met his glare without flinching. "No, we're silencing you because you forgot what teaching means." The applause that followed wasn't celebratory. It was a release, a closing of a toxic chapter. He tried to break their faith. Instead, he built their courage. After the auditorium cleared, students surrounded Barron. Some shook his hand. Some simply said, "Thank you." One girl with tearful eyes asked, "Weren't you scared when he was attacking you like that?" Barron looked down at the cross that had started it all. "Sure," he said, "but not as scared as I'd be if I stayed silent while others were being hurt." Dean McAllister and Dr. Grant approached him. "You didn't have to come here," Dr. Grant said. "You could have just used your influence to go to the media, pressure the administration. Why put yourself in his line of fire?" Barron smiled just slightly, because sometimes people need to see what standing up looks like, to believe it's possible. Dean McAllister nodded. "Because of you, we're introducing new university-wide guidelines to protect freedom of belief." He turned to the remaining students. "If you left because of Professor Wolf, you are welcome to return, with full academic review and support." More students applauded. It wasn't just relief, it was hope. He didn't come to start a war, but he showed a generation how to fight with grace. Later that day, Barron sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree. Quiet, reflective. A freshman approached him cautiously. "I watched everything from the back," he said. "You know, I've been hiding my faith for months. I thought I had to choose between being taken seriously and being true to what I believe." Barron looked up. "You don't have to choose. You can be faithful and brilliant. They're not enemies." The student sat beside him. "I want to start a student group. Interfaith discussion, safe space. Think others would join." Barron smiled. "They will now." As the sun dipped behind the ivy-covered buildings, the weight of the day settled. But it wasn't heavy. It was clarifying. Because one student stood up, others followed. Because one person refused to bend, the truth stood taller. Because faith, when worn with humility and courage, is more than a belief. It's a beacon. And that day, in that auditorium, the light returned. Barron Trump didn't set out to make headlines. He set out to honor something bigger than himself. In doing so, he helped others rediscover the strength in their own voice. Sometimes the boldest revolution begins with the quietest conviction. And when truth meets courage, legacies are born. You've just witnessed what happens when one voice, calm, unwavering, and rooted in conviction, stands up against arrogance, cruelty, and the abuse of power. This wasn't just a story about a professor and a student. It was a story about truth, about courage, about what it really means to believe in something and to protect it when it's under fire. Barron Trump didn't shout. He didn't storm out. He stood his ground with respect and resolve, and that quiet strength was louder than any insult thrown his way. Let this be a reminder. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't need permission to defend what's right. And when you carry your faith, not as a weapon, but as a light, others will see it and follow. So if this story moved you, if it made you think twice about what courage looks like in a world that demands silence, then do something simple but powerful. Share this video. Comment below. What would you have done in Barron's place? Subscribe for more powerful stories of truth, conviction, and standing up when it matters most. Because stories like this, they aren't just fiction, they're a mirror. And maybe, just maybe, you are someone else's Barron Trump. Thanks for watching. Stay strong, stay grounded, and never be afraid to shine your light in your